So I feel like I have to disclaim that my father is one of the judges, so...
It's rigged!
Let me judge.
So there's no way you're going to win, is there?
No! So when Alan announced the theme of Out with the Old, the only thing that I could think of was the quote, "First thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers, but replace lawyers with old people." And I don't actually think that, but it's all I could think about at night was death and old people. So that brings me to my grandfather. When I was 17 years old, my grandfather died. I didn't have a particularly close relationship with him, mainly because as a child he would pinch my cheeks and I hated that, so I would run whenever I would see him. But he was a fascinating man. He lived through the Great Depression, World War II. He served in Germany during Korea. Had all these amazing life stories that me, being a child and not appreciating history at the time, never got to really absorb. But he was sick for a really long time. My mother was his primary caretaker. It was a really rough time for our family. And we ended up at the funeral, and I didn't think I would cry. I used to be a crier. I don't cry so much anymore. My father would disagree with me. I like to say that I don't cry, but really I sob in the shower a lot. But we get to the funeral home, and I see my Uncle Jimmy. And my Uncle Jimmy is my grandfather's brother, and as a child he had measles, and it became so bad that he ended up never mentally aging past like 7. Vaccinate your children, people. And so he never really mentally aged past elementary school. And I always loved my Uncle Jimmy. He was kind, he loved dogs, especially my cousin Linda's basset hounds. And he was just this round little old man that would smile anytime he saw me and give me this big hug. And everybody around me at this funeral is crying. My mother's crying, my uncles are crying, my cousins are crying. This is probably the most of us that have ever been in one room. And everybody's sobbing. And we go to the cemetery, and we sit through the service, and there's the thing with the flag, and I honestly don't remember half of this. But what I do remember is being so overwhelmed by watching everybody else cry that I start sobbing, and I go sit in the back of my dad's car. And I'm sitting there with my big sunglasses, having my Jackie O moment, and crying hysterically. And my window's down, and my Uncle Jimmy sort of totters over, and all of the siblings had been given a rose from the casket, on top of the casket. And he comes over to me with this big smile, and he takes the rose, and he presses it to my nose, and he says, "Pretty girl." And Jimmy doesn't talk very much, but I remember that very distinctly, that moment with him, where everybody else is crying, and they're mourning, and it's heavy, and he smiles at me. So the old is gone. Our new generation of the children are gathered round, mourning the loss of essentially our patriarch of our family. And Jimmy smiles at me, and he hands me the rose.